Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This is the sixth, I think, seminar of this year. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Srinivasan from the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Ohio State. So Professor Srinivasan has a bachelor degree from IIT Madras, Ph.D. from Cornell, think study under Andy Ruina, who's one of the previous speakers. He has been lecturer and postdoc at Princeton, then assistant professor at Ohio State. He spent some time at MIT, and then he became associate professor at Ohio State in 2015, where he serves as currently as associate chair. So his research is on mechanical engineering, applied mathematics, biomechanics, many things. In particular, he is interested in understanding how things move. Okay, and he's going to talk about some very interesting stuff today. So, without further ado, let's leave the stage to Professor Srinivasan.
Thank you, Alessandro and Kathleen, for inviting me. Looking forward to this. Can people hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Sounds good. I'm okay with people interrupting if people want to ask a question, but I'm not sure exactly how this works. But so, yeah. Okay, so let's. This talk is going to be in roughly 5 parts. Actually, I'm just going to mainly talk about the first 4 parts. This is an age-old question about why we move the way we do. Lots of people have contributed to answering this question for literally hundreds of years, depending on how you count. And the kind of answers that you can give this question, at least sort of in the ethology literature, animal behavior literature, sort of divided into proximate cause and ultimate cause, where the proximate cause is sort of roughly defined as, in this particular case, how the structure of the nervous system gives rise to behavior, I guess, in the way it interacts with the body and the external environment. And then the ultimate cause kind of answer to this question would be something like, what criteria must movement satisfy? And by those criteria, what should good movement look like? And does real movement we do observe in the world look like those quote unquote good movements? And in this talk, we'll mostly take, we'll entirely take this kind of approach. This kind of dichotomy, of course, it's not a real dichotomy. There's like overlaps between these two kinds of things, but this kind of dichotomy is also similar to a similar trichotomy, if you will, in neuroscience called Moore levels, which have to do with the physical implementation of the behavior in the animal, the computational description, and then perhaps an algorithmic description of the solution that the animal has come up with, or evolution has come up with. Okay, so we'll mostly talk about this. And the kinds of criteria that we might talk about as being relevant to the human nervous system during locomotion, maybe things like stability, in other words, don't fall down, robustness to uncertainty, perhaps due to unknown terrain, sensory noise, which may be related to stability, avoiding fatigue, injury, pain, in some situations, maximizing performance described, or at least quantified differently in different situations, one of which might be running fast, another might be maneuvering as quickly as possible from an evading animal, etc. In some situations, the aesthetics, such as symmetry, might be useful. In the case of humans, or maybe even in the case of other animals, conformity or non-conformity with other humans might be relevant. Depending on the situation, one of these might be more important than the other. Um, and despite having all these sort of different objectives, potentially, there might still be ways to, well, some of these may be more important than other things, and depending on the particular situation, the application, we don't care about everything all the time. But despite optimizing, say, for stability, not falling down, and robustness to uncertainty, there is typically still infinitely many ways to move while not falling down and being robust to uncertainty and avoiding fatigue, injury, and pain, and things like that. Maybe not quite maximizing performance. So given that there is still an infinite space of possible solutions, one way to choose one solution out of many is to minimize energy or effort. And this is also clearly useful from an evolutionary perspective if food is scarce and yeah, I guess takes energy to get. Okay, this is of course a very, very old hypothesis, and I don't know, hundreds of articles over the last 100 years. Some famous ones being by Ralston in 1958 on walking, where he measured the energy cost of walking at a variety of different speeds for a few subjects, computed the energy per unit distance, which is plotted on the y-axis as a function of speed on the x-axis, and plotted the curve, and then found that the natural speed of walking, preferred walking speed, is roughly close to the minimum. Not exactly, but roughly. Other subjects had slightly different speeds as well. But yeah, so approximately close to the energy optimal. And certainly people are not walking at twice energy optimal speed or half energy optimal speed. They're about 10-20% off, right? In this case, for instance, he fit the simple energy cost expression to the empirical data, specifically the metabolic rate, which looks like this, increasing quadratic. And then what is plotted on the y-axis here is the cost per unit distance. This is cost per unit time. The cost per unit distance is the cost per unit time divided by velocity. So if you divide this expression by velocity, you get alpha naught divided by v plus alpha 1 v. And if you plot that curve, it sort of looks like this. And if you minimize, find the optimal velocity for the expression alpha naught divided by v plus alpha 1 times v, you get this expression. And alpha naught is about 2, alpha 1 is about 1 in some units. And if you take the square root of alpha naught by alpha 1, you get about 1.4 in meters per second. And that's roughly the speed at which people walk, plus or minus, I don't know, 10-20%. People have done similar studies for running. Back in the day, this is the running version, not quite of speed, in this case, of stride length. And energy cost is a function of stride length, and people seem to select roughly similar to, when I say roughly, I'm admitting 10-20% errors. People are just not far away from it, from optimal. So the purpose of this talk is to sort of demonstrate energy optimality, or at least people's behavior seemingly caring about energy in a variety of tasks. They're kind of different from these tasks. These are quote unquote steady state tasks where there's a person running on a treadmill for a while and this, walking on a treadmill and running on a treadmill. I guess there is no such thing as steady state in the world, in the universe. But these were certainly more steady state repetitive behaviors than at least the ones that we will see here. But yes, anyway, so these are familiar steady state tasks. And then what we will describe in this talk is energy optimality and along sort of tasks that differ from that along different dimensions. So
Raj, do you mind if I ask one question real quick? So, is there a reason why in the previous slide, is there a reason why there is no linear term in the velocity in the first equation?
no big reason. This is what Ralston happened to do. The quadratic fits the healthy human metabolic cost curve pretty well. Having the linear term doesn't improve the R square very much. If you look at people with say movement disorders or subjects with amputation, it turns out that the linear term needs to be there to actually describe the empirical metabolic cost. But yeah, no big reason. Having the linear term actually doesn't change the optimal speed expression at all.
Yeah, the other thing I had in mind related to this curve, like it almost looks more like a catenoid.
That's interesting. Well, yeah, interesting. Yeah.
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 Yeah, good. Thanks.
But I guess if you actually take this expression to heart and plot it, it's unclear to me if Ralston exactly plotted this one. But if you plot this particular thing, specifically the divided by V version of it, alpha naught by V plus alpha 1 V, which is what should be plotted here, energy per unit distance, that would have a asymptote. Like if you draw a line proportional to speed, I guess. Straight line, this will asymptote to a straight line here, and then this will go to infinity here. This curve might be not quite yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like it's asymptoting to a straight line. This looks yeah. Anyway, okay. Thank you for the question. Yeah, feel free to stop me, other people as well. Yeah. Okay. So we'll just go through a bunch of different tasks, I guess, for the rest of this talk. Here's energy optimality in a unpracticed task. This is work by Matt Hanford in the lab around 2010 or 11. And we had people walking sideways. Our subjects, of which there were about 10, were not habitual sideways walkers. So this was at least a rare task for them to do, slightly unfamiliar task. And we were asked people to walk sideways at whatever speed that they wanted. People picked speeds around 0.58 meters per second the first time that it did it, and then about 0.65 meters per second after about an hour of walking sideways on a treadmill. So after practice, before practice, about the same, not very much different. And what does the energy optimality story tell us? By having people walk for about an hour on the treadmill, we could measure the energy cost at a bunch of different speeds and construct this curve, red curve, the energy cost as function of speed. And then there's a minimum. It's a very, very flat minimum. The individual optimal speeds are here in red, and the preferred speeds are distributed here. They certainly have very close to the same mean. And I think 8 out of 10 people's energy optimal speeds were within 1% of their energy optimal energy cost. Even though there's somewhat big variability in the speeds, they're very close to their energy costs. So I guess that tells us that at the very least, people are close to their energy optimal energy, if not the energy optimal speed. Okay. A couple of notes on these results. People's pre-practice and post-practice speeds were very highly correlated, even though not exactly one-to-one. And interestingly, I guess if you actually computed because we had individual energy cost data for the 10 people, if you computed the energy optimal speed and plotted with this preferred speed, there was actually not a very high correlation. It's kind of all over the place, which might just be explained by the fact that the landscape is so flat that it doesn't matter, at least from the perspective of energy optimality, that the people are exactly at the optimum. It's okay if people are just somewhat around the optimum. Okay. Energy optimality in a transient task. Of course, all tasks are transient, but this is a particularly transient task, specifically short locomotor bouts. This work done by Nidhi Sitapati and who used to be in our lab. So the behavioral task is you ask a person to start from rest from somewhere and end at rest somewhere else. And this distance is short. It could be 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 meters. And then there is a version with 89 meters, which is the long version of it. So what do people do? People walk systematically slower for shorter distances. If you say the long distance walk is in this case averaging about 1.4 meters per second, the average speed, which is in this black error bar line, the average speeds over the whole bout goes down like so. And then the red one, which is systematically below the black one, is the peak speed or the speed at the middle of the bout, right? So people, of course, take some time to accelerate and then decelerate. So there's a peak speed somewhere in middle, and that's actually the black one is the peak speed, and the red one is the average speed, I guess. So both of them systematically go down with distance. And how can we explain this? We posited that this can be explained by the cost of starting and stopping, specifically the cost of changing speeds, which we measured, Nidhi measured by doing this experiment, in which we had people walking on a treadmill, but with changing speeds. And we had people, again, walking on the treadmill for about 2 hours with lots of different conditions of changing speeds. And we fit a very simple model to it. In this case, the simplest model that we could fit to is essentially proportional to the kinetic energy change during, and that fit the data reasonably well. It was not the best model, but it's the simplest model that we could fit to the data. And then if you say the steady state walking cost per over the bout looks like this. So sort of related to Alessandro's question, I now introduce the linear term here. But in any case, if there's a steady state, this is the cost per unit time. This is distance over velocity, which is time. So this is the, if you will, if you are walking at a constant speed over the whole bout, and this will be the cost of the walking, and then this is the cost of getting up to velocity v, and then going back down to velocity 0 again. This is the cost of changing speeds. And then if you have this kind of cost, this cost essentially systematically pulls the total cost down, total speed down, because for smaller and smaller speeds, distances, the cost of changing speeds, the cost of accelerating from 0 and going back to 0, is a bigger and bigger fraction of the total cost. So if you had to walk at a particular speed to minimize the steady state walking cost, adding this cost of changing speeds systematically decreases that for shorter and shorter bouts. And the prediction from this kind of a model is this blue band, and it overlaps roughly with the experimental data. Yes, the, I guess, punchline. At the very least, it captures the qualitative behavior that shorter distances have lower speeds.
Hi, Manoj. So I have this question. Did we also consider changing heights of the treadmill? Like if a person was walking on the treadmill, we could also change the height. So did we also take that into account while like collecting or making sure that our subject is like walking on the treadmill?
I didn't quite understand what you mean by changing height. Do you mean the slope or?
Right, the slope.
I see. We did not, this is all on a flat surface. Yeah, so we did not consider a slope situation. We just considered a horizontal situation here. And the overground walking situation is also horizontal. So they, yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of that story. The next story has to do with energy optimality in non-straight line locomotion and turning tasks. Even though I guess there had been 50 different papers on the metabolic cost of straight line walking, people hadn't measured in detail the cost of turning in locomotion. So we first measured the cost of turning as a function of the walking speed and the turning radius, again, by making people walk in circles for about 2 hours. In this case, walking in circles for about 2 hours. And it's 2 hours again because we had 4 different circle radii, and each circle radius had a few different speeds, depending on the subject, either 4 or 5 different speeds. And that's about 16 to 20 different trials, each of which is about 6-7 minutes long because it takes that long to get a good metabolic reading. That's why it's about a couple of hours of walking. But yeah, so once we were able to get the metabolic cost for each of these radii and number of different speeds, we could fit a very simple empirical metabolic cost model again. We just very slightly modified the straight line walking model, which is in this case A naught plus A1B squared, with a turning cost model, which is omega square, or which is identical to V over R square in this particular case, where V is the tangential velocity and R is the radius of the circle. And V is, if you're going in a circle, there's multiple V's that you can think of. There are average velocities. You can think of the average velocity of the inner foot, the outer foot, the center of mass. Here we are thinking of the average velocity of the center of mass, roughly. So in any case, so that's the empirical metabolic cost model. It's work done by Jeff Brown and Nadi Sitapati. And now that we have this simple metabolic cost model derived from empirical data, we can make a bunch of behavioral predictions again. So the first thing that we did was do an experiment very analogous to the previous thing, make people walk in circles, but now at whatever preferred speed they would like to walk in these circles at. So, and then it turns out that just like people systematically decrease their walking speed for shorter and shorter distances, people systematically decrease their walking speed for shorter and shorter, smaller and smaller circles. And those are these yellow box plots with some subject to subject variability. That's the systematic decrease as a function of radius, the preferred walking speed. And then we can take the expression on the previous slide and measure or find the optimal walking speed. It's a simple calculation. You can compute either the cost per distance over the circle or just the energy cost over the whole circle, given that expression as a function of the radius as well as the speed, and differentiated with respect to V and set it equal to 0. And you get an optimal speed, which has the radius dependence here. And if you plot this thing, it looks like this blue curve. Which again roughly lines up with the experimental human behavior. In all these plots, you notice that we show these bands, blue bands. The dark blue line, or typically the dark line, is the energy optimal speed for the average model that we fit to data. And then we show these sort of big bands here. The darker band here is what is the set of all speeds that are within 1% of the optimal energy cost for that radius. So these landscapes are very flat. This is energy cost per unit distance as a function of speed and radius. Because they're pretty flat, you can walk at this speed or this speed with relatively small differences in energy cost. And people seem to, for whatever reason, take advantage of that. Of course, some of this might be human variable, like person to person variability. Some of this might also be just the fact that the landscape is flat. But people seem to be relatively close to the optimal energy cost at a variety of different radii for this relatively weird task of walking in a circle. You can make.
I apologize if I keep stopping you. So, I came to my mind is, have you tested this on like people running the 200 meters or 400 meters? Because there is a big discussion on what is for example, what is the optimal lane to be, right? For many reasons, right? You have you have competitors, or you are too close, or So this might be interesting to see what they do when they really are trying to reach some sort of optimum, right? Yeah. So have you thought about that?
Right. So there's two effects there for like maximal running speed. Well, I guess if you take sprint running, like where you're trying to run as fast as possible for a short distance, then there's a question about, okay, now you are far away from this energy optimal limit. You are at the limit of your performance, limit of your muscles. Then it turns out that this is not our work. The going in a curvature limits your speed, which may not have anything to do with energy, but going like if you think of, I guess, walking in a circle or running in a circle, the legs have to do two tasks. Task number one is to hold up the body, in other words, fight gravity. In other words, produce a force that is on average equal to gravity. So the legs have to do that task. The second task they need to do, of course, is they need to provide the centripetal acceleration. So they need to provide a force toward the center of the circle always. So if you think of the leg as having a force limit, then part of the force is holding up gravity, part of the force is sort of gone in providing the centripetal acceleration. So I guess there is speed limitations due to that because you can't use the maximum like force towards just going propulsion, I suppose, partly. And then I guess for there is also energy cost changes, but I'm actually not sure. I may be getting this wrong. I'm not sure if people have measured the energy cost of going in a circle. Maybe there's a Roger Crum paper somewhere. But yeah, but I guess for long distance running, the energy cost might matter more, and maybe there's an effect there as well. Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking is that when you curve, you lose the symmetrical behavior of the two legs. So especially when someone is just doing his best to run at the maximum of their possibilities, right? Then already you are at the limit of what you're comfortable with. Actually, you are in a zone in which you are uncomfortable, because otherwise you can run at the fastest speed that you can. And so then you lose symmetry between the two legs. So that thing at certain point in a more detailed more careful approximation or something like that is gonna come out, because first of all, you turn always in one direction. It's never that you turn in the other direction. And so there is one leg which has some sort of penalization with respect to the other, advantage with respect to the other. So expect in things like 200 meters, for example, especially, that there's going to be coming out that if one, instead of having like, if someone has a model with two legs or something like that and tries to repeat this picture here, there's going to be an asymmetric behavior between the two legs, I'm guessing.
That's a good point. Absolutely, yeah. Of course, in our models, at least the models that I'm presenting here, that symmetry breaking is not captured because yes, these are point models. But absolutely, that'll play a big role. I completely agree. Yeah.
Right. I also had this point about how our body likes to stay in like either one direction at times or like walk easily in one direction. And in case like we are working on higher, like we are working or moving in certain circular directions, that would like increase our higher, like it would make the metabolic cost higher. So we are kind of like working against the inertia applied or something like that. So this would lead to higher metabolic cost as well if we are like moving in circles rather than walking on a straight path.
I completely agree. Yeah, right. So right. So there is this additional term that we were talking about in this slide here, and you can attribute it to a couple of different reasons. This term, like why might this term be here? One is well, I mean, you could think of multiple mechanisms. One is to essentially produce the additional force needed, the centripetal force needed. Another is essentially the wasted energy that you're referring to. Like you have this forward momentum and constantly having to redirect that with these stepping like motions might require additional work, mechanical work. That might be a mechanism. And you're right, you're not like perhaps preserving that momentum as efficiently as possible. It turns out like we tried to, this is not in this paper in detail. We tried to see if those mechanisms actually explain this additional cost. Those mechanisms were actually too small to explain the coefficient, at least for simple models. And it seems to us that this cost is mainly described or explained by the fact that um, we have a rigid body and we have to actually turn the rigid body with these stepping like motions. So your body kind of moves fast, moves slow, moves fast, moves slow. And that speed fluctuations might related to the stepping might require additional energy. But yeah, all those mechanisms may be possible and maybe contributing to this cost. Yeah. So how am I doing on time here?
Yes, you're good. So it's basically 30 minutes that you're talking. So yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah, so we applied the same model to a number of other kinds of tasks. In this case, with that additional term, um, uh, it's not just that additional term. For these tasks, we actually added one more term that I did not point out here. So there is this additional term of turning, but we also added the cost of changing speeds like term to the following calculations I'm going to talk about. So these calculations are based on kind of a hybrid model that includes the cost of changing speeds as well as the cost of turning. And this task has to do with, and this is data from other researchers, the Archuleta, and the tasks involved walking through. This is Taffy walking through one door and then doing something, and then you have to walk through this door eventually. And these are the human paths that they measured. And you could walk in a variety of different ways, like any of these different paths that we made up. But even if you minimize the energy cost, it turns out that you do predict these sweeping, smooth paths that you roughly observe in real data. In the actual paper, we have two versions of the model, which I'm not going into, but they produce roughly similar results for these what people would call path planning calculations, where you're trying to go from A to B. The initial tangent is specified, the final tangent is specified, and you're trying to walk in a manner that minimizes the energy consumption, specifically the cost described in the previous couple of slides, integrated over the whole task. This is another data set from Katya Mumbar's group. And again, they had people start and end at different points and had these initial facing directions and final facing directions. Again, a version of the model was able to capture their data, I guess. The data, again, their actual behavior, I believe, is these dotted lines, and then our model is the blue curves, I guess. They roughly overlap. Another task that you can think of is you're walking along a corridor and then turning by a particular angle. This is data from Dias and colleagues. And it turns out that people slow down differently for different turn angles, specifically systematically slower for larger turn angles. The yellow is the human turning data. It's a function of turn angle. And the model predicts roughly the behavior qualitatively. Okay. So that was about tasks with turning. I did show one more graph, which has to do with turning in place, where you can make a special case of that task where you're just turning in place and asking people to turn at whatever speed they want to turn at. And the model also roughly captures the speed of turning in place, as long as the turn is large enough. If you just turn by like 20 degrees, 30 degrees, the starting and stopping energy dominates the turn. But if you turn by, let's say, 270 degrees or 360 degrees, in other words, large enough turns, then the model predicts the turn rate reasonably well. Okay. So the next is a task with gate transitions. And we're not going in chronological order here, going back about 10 years now. And here we did a task in which people implicitly choose to do a gate transition. In other words, they have the option of walking, or they have the option of running, or they could do a mixture of walking and running. And this is the task. The task involved going from A to B. We did two versions of this experiment. One where A and B starting and ending were about 120 meters apart. We also did a version of the experiment where A and B were about a mile apart. I think, yeah, something like a mile. And the results are basically the same. The paper contains the 120-meter version, but we did the mile version later. The task is you have to go from A to B, and which is like a fixed distance, let's say 120 meters, and then you're given a clock, the stopwatch, which is counting down time. It goes to zero eventually and beeps at the end. And we can give people a lot of time on that stopwatch, or very little time on the stopwatch, or anything in between. So what we are constraining here is the total distance traveled and the total time, but we are not constraining the average speed of the person. Like if you're stuck on a treadmill, the average speed is, well, we're constraining the average speed, but not the instantaneous speed. On a treadmill, the instantaneous speed is constrained if it's a short enough treadmill. But here we are not constraining the instantaneous speed. People are allowed to have very large speed fluctuations in this task. So what do people do? What would you want to do? If someone gives you a lot of time to go from A to B, you might just walk all the way. If people give you very little time to go from A to B, you might just run all the way. In fact, that may be the only option available. What happens when you give someone an intermediate amount of time? Okay. This is what happens. So on the x-axis, this is experimental data. On the x-axis is the prescribed average speed, which is the total distance divided by the total time that we prescribe. So that's on the x-axis. And then we plot the time fraction of running, like how much time they ran as a function of the as a fraction of the total time. If you give people a lot of time, in other words, ask for a low enough walking speed, people basically mostly walk. So the time fraction of running is 0. If you give them very little time, they just run. Time fraction of running is 1. If you give them an intermediate amount of time, people use something in between. It's not that some people walk all the way, some people run all the way. Rather, pretty much everyone walks for a while and runs for a while. Like 8 out of 10 people walks for a while and runs for a while. Here's, for instance, for a particular like vertical slice, average speed of about 2.39. I think it's this vertical slice. These are measured walking speeds, measured using GPS in this case, outdoors, where this person in this trial is walking for a while, low speed, and then running for a while. Walking for a while, this subject is walking for a while, running for a while. This person started out running and then walks the rest of the way. This person kind of does something more complicated, where they have running for a while and then walking for a while, but their speed kind of decreases over time. This person just ran all the way, essentially jogged all the way at the right speed, I suppose. Right. But most people walk for a while and run for a while. Can we explain that using energy optimality? And it turns out we can, or at least can be captured qualitatively with energy optimality. If you look at energy per unit time for walking, it sort of looks like this, the blue curve. And then if you look at energy per unit time for running, it looks like this red curve. Whether or not there is a slight curvature here versus not has been like a point of great controversy in the metabolics of locomotion field. But in this case, we assume like a slight curvature here. But once you give yourself that, it turns out that you can construct a tangent between these two curves, which is this black line. And then the black line touches these two curves at 2 points. And below this point, in other words, if you're asked to walk at a speed below the speed, you should just walk all the way. And then if you're asked to run at a speed or basically travel at a speed above this point, you should just run all the way. But it turns out that between these two speeds, it's actually better to use a mixture of walking and running. So if you want to go at about this speed, it's energetically better to like walk for 50% of the time, run for 50% of the time, and your energy cost will be systematically lower than the red curve or the black or the blue curve. Specifically, it'll be equal to the black curve, which is lower than either of those two curves. So you can do better than walking all the way or running all the way by mixing the two, and approximately that's what people seem to do. The prediction from this simple model is provided here. This pink curve is the time fraction of running with this simple description, model description, which assumes that the transition between walking and running requires no additional cost. That gives this pink curve. And then if you do assume that there is a transition cost, say, due to the cost of changing speeds or whatever, then you get this slightly different pink curve here, which again, you might say both of these sort of look like this, again, qualitatively. Getting the quantitative things exactly right will depend on like the details of these curves and things like that, which we were not quite going for here. Okay. So over the years, I guess we've done a bunch of different studies related to energy optimality, but this is sort of how it started back in the day, where we showed energy optimality of specifically walking and running emerging from a simple mathematical model. In this case, a mathematical model with telescoping legs, which has the ability to do arbitrary stance phase trajectories. It's not entirely arbitrary, but an infinite set of stance phase trajectories by changing the force as a function of time, essentially arbitrarily. You can describe a bunch of different complicated gates, and then if you solve an optimization problem that asks for the energy minimal gates from the space of walking or running or whatever gates that are possible for the simple model, you get inverted pendulum walking at low speeds to be optimal, and then you get something that looks like impulsive running to be optimal at high speeds. And these are optimal if you do not specify a maximum force. In other words, you allow the force to go very high. This sort of a convenient mathematical limit produces these simple models. And then if you enforce force limits, you get more compliant looking gates, both for walking and running. Alessandro, you had a question or
Yes,
comment?
thank you. So it's on the previous slide. Sorry, I got there late.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So in the so now I'm not sure, but anyways, the question is this one. So is there some sort of in this minimization problem, is there a potential which has something like this, just two minima? Is there something like that here involved?
So you can plot the so what is plotted here is the energy per unit time. You can divide on which is these blue curve, red curve, and then you can plot the energy per unit distance version of it, which will basically take whatever is plotted here and divide by velocity, and that will give rise to what looks like two minima, right? So
Right.
one
So the
for
reason for
walking, one for running. Yeah.
so the reason for which I'm mentioning this is that this to me looks like very, not exactly precisely, but vaguely at least, situations in which you have things like the Fisher equation, okay, Fisher KPP equation, in which you have a zero equilibrium, one equilibrium, and then you have in between some sort of traveling waves, which can be many somehow because you have some sort of invariance, right? So very roughly, right? That reminds me something like that, in which the equilibrium equal to one is the running, equilibrium equal to zero is the walking, and in between there is something that you can go in many different, not many, but somehow some different ways. So that's what I thought about when I saw this graph.
Right. So it's kind of related to, yeah, those kinds of sort of physicsy phenomena. Absolutely. It's related to, yeah, so basically non-convexity of the energy landscape having multiple minima, specifically non-convexity. And so I guess this is the so-called Jensen's inequality for convex functions, which says that for convex functions, if you switch between 2 points, um, like the function of the average is always less than the average of the function is the definition of convex functions. But when you have a non-convex functions, like things that go up and down again, you can basically jump between the two minima, crudely speaking, to do better than either one of the two minima. Physicsy phase transitions like water and water vapor existing sort of in the same situation. I think there are like metallic phase transitions where I don't know, two versions of like alloys of iron where you get what's called twinning microstructure, where the iron is in both phases, kind of thing. So there's like a bunch of physics analogs of this kind of mixture of phases. Yeah.
And the other component here, I believe, is that there is some invariance. So the function that you minimize must have some invariance, right? Some sort of freedom, right? Some parameters which you can tweak a little bit, because here you have, it seems to me, an infinite number of solutions which can go from walking to running. Is that correct?
In this case, yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily an invariance, but you have flexibility. You have arbitrary flexibility for the gait you choose and the speed you choose. So yeah, so you have like freedom that way. You could walk at lower speeds, run at higher speeds, or vice versa, and basically you're allowed to mix those gaits and speeds to get something in between walking and running. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks for those questions. Yeah.
Also, like when we are like talking about gait locomotion, do we also consider the muscle movement interaction, like how while walking one muscle is being changed or something like that, and the data which we model, the inverted pendulum one, is it like validated against something like an ideal situation or something like that?
Good question. Like most things that I've described so far, like until this slide, ignore things like muscles and so on. Of course, these cost functions are empirically based, and of course include whatever muscles are doing implicitly. And like the models until here don't even involve like stepping mechanics and things like that. This model, I guess, includes the mechanics of stepping and transitioning from one one stance phase to another stance phase or flight phase. We have worked on, and a large number of people have worked on. Sorry, phone is ringing. Sorry about that. And yeah, so there's large, but lots of models that do simple kinds of mechanics, but we can also do sort of muscle-driven mechanics for locomotion. And lots of other people have worked on that. Like I'm not presenting that right now, I guess, is the short answer. Whether or not the inverted pendulum model is validated against like more detailed experiments or models, I guess it's more of a qualitative validation in terms of like qualitative behaviors rather than quantitative validation, I would say. It's probably not possible to quantitatively validate the model given its simplicity. Yeah. Okay, notice that I have about 5 minutes left. So let me just spend perhaps 2 or 3 minutes in that 5 minutes, just skipping over a bunch of things. So we did a bunch of experiments in which we characterized some aspects of the recovery during locomotion. Specifically, these are experiments, specifically some things to do with foot placement control, and characterized how the foot placement is modulated in response to perturbations. We showed that they can be inferred from natural step-to-step variability in the absence of perturbations as well, that you get very good correlation between the two things. We can show, it turns out, that that kind of foot placement-based recovery can be explained using energy optimality as well, at least approximately, where these gray bands are energy actual data, and the colored lines are model-based predictions based on energy optimality from a simple model. We can then apply these models to try to predict how people will synchronize potentially on walking on shaking bridges. We can predict how people might step versus not. So during standing perturbations, if you ask people to not fall down, I guess, for small perturbations, they don't step. For large perturbations, they step. For intermediate perturbations, it turns out they step even though they can recover without stepping. And it turns out that our model predicts that, where there is an intermediate range of perturbations where it is possible to recover without stepping, but it's energy optimal to step. And people seem to show that kind of behavior in experiments. And the final couple of slides have to do with learning and adaptation. All that I've talked about, well, arguably, has ignored the fact that people's choices, gait choices, might change with time, with experience, especially in novel tasks. And there's a whole field on locomotor adaptation that has actually grown over the last few years. And the last couple of slides, which I'm just going to show here, not explain in detail, has to do with how we can use energy optimality, but now use energy optimality in not a single shot manner, but how energy is actually optimized, a hypothesis for how energy is actually optimized to try to explain adaptation in a variety of different experiments. Yes, so I guess I'll stop there in the interest of time. And if people have questions, I can try to address them in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so let's thank Professor Srinivasan for the great talk. I think there is Professor Wilson who has a question.
Hi, Manoj. I mean, the thing that intrigues me is we look at these cost functions and they're so variable. It's so hard to measure VO2 for an individual when you've got variation between trials of 5% or more. Yet we're optimizing. When you look at your graph of energy consumption versus speed, they're very small nuances. I mean, do you think people are actually somehow assessing energetics? Do you think there's some sort of integration of muscle activity? What are they actually optimizing for? What is the repeatability within an individual of the measurements you're making? Because I mean, I've struggled for about 30 years with this mismatch between energetics and anything that common sense tells me it should actually be correlated to.
Right. I guess there is multiple sources of variability. There's our experimental variability, and then the variability or error to which humans can detect their own energy cost function with whatever sensors that they might have. Like, for instance, like integrating muscle forces and muscle length rates, like you suggested. And people must be doing things like that, I guess, because the internal metabolic dynamics are slow. It takes a while for the body to, say, ramp up oxygen to the relevant muscles and things like that. But yeah, so people must be integrating internally to estimate energy costs. How accurate they are in optimizing. I guess one of my previous plots, let me see if I can go to that one. Yeah, I guess partly like this flatness, this broad range of predictions is due to that A, flatness, and B, the variability that we have in the experimental measurements of metabolic cost. The fact that we are not able to predict the energy optimal speed more than this band, basically.
So
and people seem to be in that. Yeah.
So if you drew that line for each individual subject, how horrible would it look? Is it a consistent pattern within subjects, or do you have to average across subjects to get the line?
So all subjects look like this, where they are all like slightly different curves. They're all slightly different curves, roughly falling within that band, but it's a mess sort of along that band. Let me.
So if we stick a mass in their head or stick a mass somewhere near the center of gravity,
right?
Do you get a predictable change in that curve, which Newton would say is sensible?
If you do enough trials, per subject, I think you get predictable changes. We have not done that particular experiment, but yeah. I feel like with mass, you get like a big enough mass and
Typical move.
enough data points, we get a predictable change. But so here is actually the like this is n different subjects, the individual metabolic data, and they all have the same, I don't know, roughly the same kind of shape. This person is maybe has a lower thing, and this is actually the individual correlation, preferred speed versus energy optimal speed. Individual to individual, there is barely any correlation. It turns out, right? So that's sort of is related to your question. The behaviorally, yeah, on average, people seem to be very close to energy optimal in terms of the behavior. Individually, they seem to be close to the energy optimal energy, which maybe is all they can hope for because the landscapes are so flat, at least in many of these tasks. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but yes.
No, I mean it's not so much a question as a problem I have, which I was hoping you would offer me some counselling for, which is I know I can't measure VO2 well, but we have a system which can detect remarkable nuances and fluctuation remarkably well, and somehow we optimize for it. So either it's magic or there's some marker which we're optimizing for, which we're kind of ignoring or losing in our analysis. That's why I'm interested in what the curve looks like for an individual. That's why I'm interested in how reproducible that is for an individual. I know how long it takes me to walk to the train station and the same every day. But why is it you use 50% more or 50% less energy than I do for the same journey? What's the difference when we should be so optimum every other way? And I feel it's probably something to break a few graduate students, but I wish someone would tell me before I retire.
Yeah, well, I agree.
I've used enough of your time.
Open questions, yeah. Yeah.
I think there is Dr. Kang, who has the hand raised.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep. In some, yeah.
Oh yeah. Great talk, Manoj. I think it's somewhat aligned with the previous question, but I just, energy optimality, I think, has been discussed for many years. Why do you what's your thought on like patient population or like using energy optimality for like wearable robots has been pretty dang good with healthy people, but then you try to use the same approach on like amputees or and what do you think, do you think that there's going to be some physiological condition that kind of constraints energy optimality for these populations? I just wanted to get your thoughts, not so much of a question, but just your opinions on things.
My understanding is that there are studies in some populations, like this is without even wearable robotics, but studies in some populations with movement disorders versus some movement disorders with other movement disorders, where in some movement disorders people are closer to energy optimal, and in other movement disorders people are far away from energy optimal, even though they're able to walk at what seems like the energy optimal speed. And I would say, I don't know if you understand why that is the case. Yeah, I would say there's lots of open problems there. And the ability to walk near energy optimal or find the energy optimal, or as you mentioned, maybe there are other implicit objectives that they care about in those conditions that may be more important than energy. Like the fact that there may be like lots of sensory noise or motor noise, maybe delays, sensory delays, which might make people walk more cautiously at slower speeds, systematically slower speeds, for instance. There may be sensory deficits let's say when you have certain movement disorders, or in the case of subjects with amputation, sensory deficits because of the amputation, in fact, which might prevent you from taking full advantage of whatever assistance the device is providing. Yeah, I think these it feels like there's a whole range of open questions that we need to figure out. What is the correct mixture of objectives? In this case, I've focused on energy optimality, but people clearly care about other aspects of locomotor performance. So how are these things traded off? It's largely an open question, as well as how is people's ability to optimize curtailed by various deficits? Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if I have a definitive answer.
Good. Thanks.
Awesome. So, well, we stole 10 minutes extra, about 10 minutes extra to Professor Srinivasan. So let's thank him for the great presentation. Thanks everybody for the participation, for the questions. It was a great presentation. Thank you so much.